Hello, so we're going to have a look at volatile prices, and volatile prices is an example of a market failure. Okay, so let's understand what we mean by volatile prices. So when we talk about volatile prices, we talk about the price going up and down. So, why is it a market failure with prices going up and down? Well, when prices go up, obviously consumers are worse off, and when prices go down, producers are worse off. And producers are worse off when prices decrease. So let's hang on a minute. Some of you may be thinking, why are producers worse off when prices decrease? Because as you would expect, the law of demand states that as prices fall, quantity demanded increases, and we'd expect that producers would be therefore better off. However, volatile prices is a specific market failure associated with commodities, and what we know about commodities is that they are necessities, and therefore the demand for them is price inelastic. These commodities are natural raw materials. There are no substitutes for those specific raw materials, and as they are necessities, their price elasticity of demand is going to be price inelastic, and therefore when the price falls, what you would see is a less than proportional increase in quantity demanded, and therefore total revenue for producers would fall, and that's why producers are worse off when prices fall. So, volatile prices, the market failure, as I just mentioned moments ago, associated with commodities. And what we mean by commodities is we mean raw materials. And I'm going to list a few examples of commodities that we may wish to talk about. So, wheat, for example, we can think about tin, we can think about copper, and there are just a few examples of commodities that we may wish to talk about. So, as I said, volatile prices is bad for consumers, obviously when the price rises, and prices falling is bad for producers. So we need to demonstrate why volatile prices is an example of a market failure, and to do that we're going to use a demand and supply diagram. And we're just going to label it price and quantity. So, as I said in my explanation moments ago, commodities tend to be price inelastic. And the reason why that is because they are necessities. People need them no matter what. And as I said, there are no substitutes for particular commodities. If you want to produce petrol, you will need oil, for example. There isn't really a substitute for oil. Obviously, in more recent years, we've got electric cars now, but still, again, there isn't a wide number of substitutes for oil. Okay, and then we're going to say that supply tends to be quite inelastic as well. So we're going to draw a steep supply curve, and we're going to label that S. Okay, and we're going to label the market equilibrium P and Q. So let's just write down what I was just discussing moments ago. So let's take an example of a commodity such as wheat, for example. So wheat, as I said, is an example of a commodity. The PED, as I just said, the price elasticity demand is price inelastic. The reason for that, as we just said, is wheat is a necessity. And also, as I mentioned, the price elasticity of supply is inelastic. And the reason why that is when planting the necessary crops, when planting wheat, you can't suddenly increase the supply of wheat overnight, because wheat takes a long time to grow. So the reason why lots of agricultural products are the price elasticity of supply of agricultural products is price inelastic is because of the nature of them, and it takes a long time for them to grow. So the idea that it's the price elasticity of supply is inelastic is that farmers can't respond quickly to any changes in price, because obviously it takes a long period of time in order for the crops to grow. So we've explained why our diagram is shaped the way it is. Okay, so let's consider now there is a really good harvest. So there's a good harvest. And that good harvest may be due to favourable climate, or a good climate. So there was plenty of rain and sunshine, allowing the wheat to grow. So as a result, we're going to see an increase in supply. So therefore, we will see an outward shift of the supply curve. S to S1. So increase in supply, S to S1. What we see is we see an extension along the demand curve, and we'll draw in our new equilibrium now. Extension on the demand curve, we see a fall in the price from P to P1, and we see a less than proportional increase in quantity demanded from Q to Q1. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means due to the fall in price and the less than proportional increase in quantity demanded, it means it's going to be a reduction in total revenue for farmers. So quite evidently here, the fall in price has negatively impacted upon farmers and actually made them worse off. So we can see why we originally said that volatile prices is an example of market failure. Yes, consumers are going to be better off because of the lower prices. However, the farmers, in this case, which are the producers, are going to be worse off because their total revenue's fallen. So now let's consider a bad harvest. So if there is a bad harvest, what we would see here is, and that bad harvest, again, may be due to bad weather. So maybe there was flooding, for example, and that wiped out all the crops. So bad weather is going to lead to a reduction in supply. So again, we'll add into our diagram a nice inelastic supply curve, and we're going to label this one S2. So, for example, the decrease in supply, and let's just assume we're at our S1. So if we had a really bad harvest following the really good harvest, we're going to go from S1 to S2. There we go. So there's a decrease in supply and we go from S1 to S2. So therefore, we're now going to shoot our price up to P2. And we're going to see a Q2. So what we see here in this instance, the bad weather has led to a bad harvest. So the previous year we had a really good harvest and that was really beneficial for consumers, but it was at the detriment to the producers, in this case the farmers, because they had a loss in total revenue. However, the following year there's a bad harvest, so therefore we see supply reduced from S1 to S2, and as a result we see a very large increase in the price from P1 to P2, and we see a less than proportional decrease in QD. Decrease in QD, and the reason for the less than proportional decrease in QD is because obviously wheat is a necessity. Q1 to Q2. So what we need to say here, well, obviously this is really, really bad for consumers. Their consumer surplus has decreased significantly due to the increase in price. So consumers are worse off. There's a reduction in consumer surplus, a significant reduction in consumer surplus, and the reason why that is due to the large increase in price. In this case, we've gone from P1 to P2. So consumers are really worse off. The consumer surplus has decreased massively, and that's due to the large increase in price. We could even have another scenario that we may wish to add to our diagram, again, to further demonstrate volatile prices. So let's say we had a bad harvest. However, in this country, for example, we may see large amounts of immigration and therefore the population suddenly increases massively. So let's assume there's an increase in population, for example. What's that going to do? Well, if there's an increase in population, it's going to increase the demand for wheat. So let's demonstrate that on our diagram. D1. We'll go to P3 now. We've actually gone back to the quantity that we originally had at the original market equilibrium. So the population's increased. There's an increase in demand. We see an extension. Well, let's just, first of all, before we go to the extension along the supply curve, increase in demand, D to D1. What we see is we see an extension along the supply curve. We see an increase in price, P2 to P3. We see an increase in quantity from Q2 to Q. So again, this increase in price is again consumer surplus. Again, we're looking at consumer surplus being negatively impacted due to the increase in price. So consumer surplus is falling due to the increase in price. So we can quite clearly see that this graph demonstrates volatile prices, and as we've discussed, when prices rise, consumers are worse off due to falling consumer surplus, and when prices fall, producers are, in this case farmers, are worse off due to a fall in total revenue. And the reason why total revenue falls is because the price elasticity of supply and the price elasticity of, well, in this case, the price elasticity of demand is price inelastic, and therefore a decrease in price leads to a less than proportional increase in QD, and therefore total revenue would fall. So really important that we could demonstrate on a diagram volatile prices. Obviously, we quite clearly see the price going up, down. We've explained it here with various scenarios, with various shifts in supply, changes in demand. We've explained how it negatively impacts upon certain stakeholders or economic agents. In this case, we've looked at the impacts on consumers and producers. So obviously, people are losing out here due to these volatile prices. Sometimes it's going to be consumers, sometimes it's going to be producers. So we quite clearly see we need some element of government intervention in order to help correct this market failure of volatile prices. And this is where we look at the use of buffer stocks. So clear need for government intervention. And the government intervention that we're going to use is buffer stock. So, if we get a exam question which focuses on evaluate the usefulness of a buffer stock scheme, what you're going to do at the start of the exam answer is you're going to outline the market failure that a buffer stock scheme is used to correct. And the market failure that a buffer stock scheme is used to correct is volatile prices. And we've quite clearly demonstrated why volatile prices is an example of a market failure with regards to the negative impact on producers and consumers.